Today, I am going to demystify all the different ways that we can feed yeast to create alcohol. So by the end of this video, you're going to be able to pick up a random product off the shelf and have a really good idea how to turn that into booze. Trust me guys, this is insanely freeing knowledge when you're chasing the craft of home distillation. How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I'm Jesse and this is Still It. New distillers can often find it pretty hard to grab a specific item off the shelf that they would like to use as an ingredient in a mash to distill and then figure out how to actually ferment that thing. So if you've ever found yourself asking, what on earth do I do with this product to ferment it? How do I take this thing, turn it into alcohol so I can distill it? You're in the right place, guys. This is the video for you. The actual technical processes of how all of this stuff works can be kind of complex, to be honest, but the good news is we don't need to know all of that. We just need to know the how. How are we going to do things to make it actually work? So what I'm going to do today is attempt to give you just a touch, a taste of the why. Just enough why so you can understand the how. I like to think of 5 separate categories of products that we can use to create a wash. Here's how I think of those categories in my mind. Dissolvable sugar, mashable malts, mash-ready adjuncts, cookable adjuncts, and base malts. So let's get stuck right in with the first one, which is sugar, dissolvable sugar. And the reason we're doing this one first is because it is by far the most simple of categories. The thing that binds this whole group together is the fact that all of these products have sugar in them already available to us that is fermentable. The yeast can eat that sugar and turn it into alcohol. We don't have to do anything else to the product in terms of changing things around. All we have to do is make the sugar accessible to the yeast. And this whole category the only tips and tricks I can give you about this stuff is really logistical stuff. So it turns into, how do you physically get that sugar to dissolve into water? The really obvious example of products we could be talking about here is table sugar. It's the most simple form of sugar that we can use and it is completely fermentable. But the category very quickly expands from there. So there's all of the other granulated sugars that you can buy in a box or a bag, like brown sugar, for example, or demerara sugar. And then it goes on to things like syrups, golden syrup, maple syrup, whatever other syrup you can come up with. But it goes even further than that to things like fruit, grapes, pears, plums, peaches, or even soda or candy. Like I said, this is the most basic category, and what it comes down to really is dicing up the products or pureeing them to the point where the sugar in them can be easily soluble into the liquid. You don't want a full pear. If you throw a full pear into water, I mean, it's going to take a long time for that to break down and the yeast to be able to penetrate all the way into the middle, right? And yes, you can totally use things like pectic enzyme if you want to get into all of that. But at the end of the day, that's not making more sugar. Once again, it's just really breaking things down to allow them to be accessible to dissolve in water. To simply sum this category up, break things into teeny tiny little pieces, put it into water, ferment. Let's take a step up the conceptual ladder from straight sugar to mashable malts. And to be fair, this is a bit of a stretch between the two, but it's not too complex. You guys have got it. I promise you, don't stress about it. This is, however, a good time to have a quick word from today's sponsor, who is wonderful at helping people understand tricky and complex conceptual ideas. Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of courses made by people that actually care and practice about what they're teaching, which is cool. It's curated specifically for learning, which means there's no ads getting in the way of things like that. And they're constantly uploading new premium classes, which means you can keep learning and keep following the passion that you have to get to whatever goal it is you're working towards. Lately, I've been watching Finding Fulfillment with Pivots by Emma Gannon. And I know you guys know that a certain little global situation that came about recently means that I had to pivot pretty hard. But watching this course is really helping me get my head around changes that have happened in the past and getting my ducks in a row to make better changes in the future, which means better content for you guys. The first 1,000 Still It subscribers that use the link in the description down below are going to get a 1 month free premium Skillshare subscription. That's a lot of learning you can do in 1 month. Check it out, guys. Mashable malts contain both starch and enough enzymes to break that starch down into sugar that the yeast can eat. Now, if you're new to all of this, everything I said is probably complete and utter gobbledygook. Let's break it down for you. Malted grains are created through the process of malting, funnily enough. And to be honest, you don't really need to understand any of that for the point of this video. Just know that you can't get a malted grain without malting it. I say that because if you're looking for malted products, that's how you're going to find them. The easiest place to get them is at a homebrew store, and those guys, trust me, the beer guys will be able to answer any questions you have about this stuff. We're not going to get bogged down on that for this video. Next up, let's talk about starch. Pretend this is starch. Starch and sugar are basically exactly the same thing. Whoops. It's just that starch is a really big, long molecule and sugar is a little tiny one. Sugar can eat this, it can ferment it, but it can't break these big, long molecules down. So what we do is utilize these enzymes in the mashable malts to go along and take the big, long starches and cut them down into sugars. I also said enough enzymes. We also need to make sure that these mashable malts have enough enzymes, not just some enzymes, they have enough. And it turns out that different types of malted grain, malted in different ways, have an insanely variable amount of enzymes that they carry. We measure that amount of enzymes in diastatic power with the unit of degrees Litmer. The long and short of it, the how, not the why, is that you need to have about 35 to 45 degrees Litmer present to be able to actually mash something. I tend to aim for about 40 degrees Litmer when I'm doing distilling stuff. Once again, don't stress about this too much. I honestly, guys, I almost didn't mention this because I knew it was going to trip people up, and it's getting into the too much why and not enough how, right? And the reason I say that is that most malted grains are going to have enough enzymes to mash themselves, but there are some pitfalls, and we're going to talk about that very soon. All right, mashing. Mashing is a process that is quite involved in and of itself. In fact, it would take an entire video to explain it. Funnily enough, I have one up here if you want to check out more. But for the process of this video, all you really need to know, it is the process of soaking grain or starch in hot water at a very specific temperature in the presence of enzymes for a certain amount of time, and that goes along and slices all of those starch molecules down into smaller fermentable sugars for our yeast. I know all of this might sound a little bit crazy. I get it, guys, I really do. There's a lot of words here that you haven't heard before if you're not doing this stuff regularly. I get it, and that's why I'm trying to break it down into little bits for you. Please, guys, if you're at this point and you feel like you don't get it, rewind back to the beginning of this little section and listen to it a couple of times. If there's a word you don't understand, go and look it up or drop it in the comment section down below. I will try and help people out down there in the first couple of days of this video being live. If I can't do it, someone else is going to come along and help you out. But to summarize this whole section of mashable malts, it breaks down to just mash them. Let's get on to the next category, which is mash ready adjuncts. And I'm kind of stealing this descriptor, the category descriptor, from the brewing world and bastardizing a little bit. So if it's different than what you remember, that's cool. If you know what we're talking about from a brewing perspective, you're going to be able to understand this. Go with it. It turns out that not all malted grains have enough enzymes, enough diastatic power, like we just talked about, to actually convert themselves. They don't have enough enzymes to turn their starch into fermentable sugar. And the most obvious, or the most run into, the most frequent example of this that we probably get in distilling is malted corn. This stuff has almost no active enzymes left in it after the malting process. It's ready to be mashed. It can be mashed, but it needs enzymes coming from somewhere else. In the case of malted corn, the malting process has done something else to the starch that turns out to be very, very important for the mashing process. Something we haven't talked about yet, which is gelatinization. Before gelatinization, those big long molecules of starch that we talked about aren't big long molecules at all. They're actually tightly bound little balls. And these little balls really, really do not want to dissolve in water. And if they're not water soluble, if they won't dissolve into water, then those enzymes that we talked about in the last category, they just can't even get to it. It's not a case of they can't cut it, they just They just can't reach it. So gelatinization takes this ball of starch and turns it into a big long string. Well, not really, but you get the point. And this is now soluble in water, meaning the enzymes can get to it. And it turns out you don't have to malt something to gelatinize it. You can also cook it. So what do all of the things in this category have in common with each other? They have gelatinized starch, but they don't have their own enzymes. Are you feeling lost yet? Jesse, what about a real world example? Stop talking theory. Great, I'm glad you asked. Cornflakes, puffed wheat, rice bubbles, quick oats. These are all examples of pre-gelatinized starch that I would call a mashable adjunct. But it's not just breakfast foods, cereals that fall into this category. Literally any starch that has already been gelatinized ahead of time is going to fall into this category. A lot of these products out there in the real world will often be called steam flaked, or hot rolled, I've seen as well. And all of these things are basically the same thing. They've been cooked and squished, so they're ready to use, like quick oats. You can find them at homebrew stores, or even you can find things like steam flaked barley at an animal feed store. But it goes even further than that. Bread, that's a starch that's been pre-cooked for us, right? Noodles, donuts, you get the idea. To sum it up, this category is add enzymes and mash. But where do those enzymes come from? You could, of course, use bottled enzymes, and that's a completely viable way about going about things. Perhaps a little bit outside the scope of this video, but totally doable. Instead, what you could do is use a base malt. That's the next category. Do you remember diastatic power? We talked about it back in the Mashable Malts section. It's the amount of enzymes a malted product has. The amount of products that a base malt have is kind of what defines it. They have a ton. Once again, remember when we were talking about mashing with enzymes earlier on, and I said that you're going to be aiming for or need around about 40 degrees Litner to get the job done. Well, these base malts, they got more than that. They are more like in the range of 100 would be low probably for a base malt, up to 170, maybe even 200 degrees Litner. That is a whole lot of enzymes they have left over after converting the starches that they themselves carry. How do you get these magical base malts? It's really pretty simple. Homebrewing stores. Brewing is insanely popular. It's popular in a lot more places than distilling is, and base malt is literally the base of all grain brewing. Go to a homebrew store, they'll have them. They come in a whole range of different names, but I'll put some names in the description down below so you know what you're looking for. Let's say we want to mash rice bubbles. They have gelatinized starch, but they don't have any enzymes, so they're a mashable adjunct. We are going to use, to add the enzymes to this, American ale malt. For the sake of keeping maths easy, let's say that the ale malt has a diastatic power of 120, and that we're aiming for 40 in the mash. That means that the ale malt has more than enough enzymes to convert a 1-to-1 ratio of malt to rice bubbles. So if you had 1 kilo or 1 pound or 1 freaking ton of ale malt, you could use 1 kilo, 1 pound, 1 ton of rice bubbles. Easily. To be honest, you could probably stretch it to 1 to 2. So 1 kilo of ale malt would be able to convert the starch in itself and 2 kilos of rice bubbles. To be honest, that's really all you need to know about diastatic power when it comes to mashing stuff for distilling. Take a base malt, mix it with up to 2 times itself in a mashable adjunct, something that already has gelatinized sugar, and you're probably going to have a good time. But if you wanted to go into all of this in more depth, you can check out this video up here. It's all about diastatic power. It even has some formulas in it to help you calculate exactly what you need if you want to, do it by the books. So to sum up this category of base malts are really enzyme rich. Use the leftover enzymes to convert starch and other stuff. All right, guys, we're almost there. Last category. Hang in there. It's worth it. Trust me, you need to know this stuff. What do we do with starches that haven't been cooked or gelatinized already? What do we do if we want to use raw barley to make an Irish whiskey, or we want to make bourbon with corn? What do? The starch hasn't been cooked yet. I mean, you cook it. No, but really, guys, you actually do just cook it. The easiest way normally to go about this is to make a big old porridge. You break the starch sauce down into small enough pieces that it'll be mixed up with the water well. You cook it, you boil it for a decent length of time. Easiest way to tell is when it starts to get really thick, you've got to the point where starch is starting to get gelatinized. And at that point, you mash it. You add malted barley to it or bottled enzymes if you want to go that way. All of the stuff we talked about in the previous section, base malts, add base malts to it and mash it. The problem here is that on a home distilling scale, dealing with that really thick goop in larger volumes, man, it can be a nightmare. It can be a real pain in the butt. The homebrewing guys refer to this as a cereal mash, and I am going to do a cereal mash soon. I've been meaning to do it for ages. I'm sorry guys, it will be coming soon. I promise you, watch this space, okay? But don't think that it's only raw barley and corn that you can do this with. Pretty much any sorts of starch or any carbs that you cook with are fair game. So rice, flour, yams, sweet potato, you get the idea, right? And the reason this information is so freeing, guys, is now that you know it, now that you know that pretty much anything that you call carbs when you cook it and eat it as a meal is a potential ingredient to distill. That is pretty freaking cool. Remember, all we're doing is we're taking that smushed up little ball of starch and opening it out so the sugar can get to it. That's all cooking it is going to do. And then we mash it like normal with the base malt or the bottled enzymes in a mash to turn it into small little sugar molecules that the yeast can eat up and ferment and turn into alcohol. Pretty freaking cool. I should note also, guys, that you don't necessarily need to cook stuff just by turning it into porridge, by boiling it. There's a bunch of other ways you can go about it. In fact, there's some other distilled products on the market that use different ways of doing it. Comment section, have a go at it, see how many of them you can figure out. Actually, I can only think of one right now. I'm sure there's more. Tell me down there. But summing this category up really is pretty simple. Take raw, uncooked, or ungelatinized starch, cook it, and then add some enzymes and mash it. Most of the time the enzymes are going to come from base malt or out of a bottle. That was the last category, guys, and I want to get on to describing how we can mix a bunch of those categories together to make something. But first, I do just need to say that there are other processes out there that can turn things that we haven't even talked about yet into something that's fermentable. For example, the dairy industry here in New Zealand basically messes with its waste streams to turn it into fermentable sugars, and then they can distill it. There are other things out there, but what we've talked about here today is the guts of pretty much any traditional alcohol comes from one of or a combination of these steps. Most products out there that you're going to run into that you can ferment, you're going to be able to deal to with these steps. All right, should we do an example where we sort of mix everything together, shall we? So, all right, specific example of things we could do to mix all of this together. Halloween is coming up soon, so let's do something crazy and out there for that. Candy corn. Candy corn's sugar. It'll dissolve. Dissolvable sugar, we've got that one crossed off. Cornflakes, we're going to throw cornflakes into it, and they are gelatinized already, but they don't have any enzyme. That's a mashable adjunct. We're going to throw some ale malt in there, which kind of acts like the mashable malt and the base malt together. I mean, it's only acting as a base malt. You get the idea. It's malt. It's got enzymes. And lastly, we're going to take some pumpkin and roast the pumpkin in the oven. Bang. Add that on in there as well and mash it all together. Would that be delicious? I don't know. Honestly, I have no freaking idea. Actually, Bearded and Board did something similar. Check it out up over here. I would guess that it would be very interesting at the very least as a novelty item for Halloween. That's not the point. The point is, now that you have this information, you can throw things together like this almost at a whim. And it is such an awesome feeling, guys. Trust me, opening your pantry up is a creative exercise in distilling. Going to the supermarket is going to blow your mind because everywhere you turn, you're going to see options on stuff that you could turn into booze. It is very, very cool. Now, for those of you that are new, if you're still watching this and you're still feeling confused, I promise you, none of it is complex. It's just busy. There's a lot of terms. I'm sure I've used terms in this video that you don't understand, and that's my fault. I apologize for it. Trust me, go back to the beginning of the video, watch it again. If you run into something you don't understand, Google it. Keep going. You'll get it, I promise you, and it is going to open up a whole world for you. Cool? Get stuck in, guys. So, team, if you like this video, please, please, please give it a thumbs up. That helps me out a whole lot. And it tells me too that I'm making the sort of content that you guys like and I should make more of it. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe down below for me. That helps me out heaps as well. And I'll catch you next time, guys. Keep on chasing the craft. See ya.